Alright, welcome to the fifth and luckily final installment of this Chapter 13 lecture. I was talking about mechanisms of evolution. So what are the forces that actually drive allele changes in a population? And I just finished up talking about genetic drift, and the founder effect is another example of genetic drift. Gene flow is another source of evolutionary change, so this is a separate mechanism of evolution from genetic drift. And it can be defined as genetic exchange with another population through immigration, which is individuals coming into an area, and or emigration, which is individuals leaving an area. Gene flow may result in the gain or loss of alleles, and it tends to reduce genetic differences between populations. This makes intuitive sense. Why? Because when we have more interbreeding within populations, you can expect those two populations to have fewer genetic differences between them and thus be more homogeneous. Mutations is another mechanism of evolution, and it's just any change in the nucleotide sequence of DNA. So an example that I was talking about earlier was how a simple mutation has given rise to sickle cell disease. If a mutation confers a competitive advantage, then it tends to be passed on and becomes more frequent in the population. So if, for example, this adenine this thymine on this DNA molecule gets substituted or is mutated to an adenine, that is going to influence what protein is made, because the RNA strand that is made in the transcription process is going to differ in the nitrogenous base sequence. So instead of being GAA, it's going to be GUA in this case. And that is going to potentially form a whole different protein. So if that mutation is actually advantageous, then just like any other adaptive trait, it's going to be passed on in greater frequency than one would expect if it were neutral or disadvantageous, and it becomes more frequent in the population. Okay, natural selection, what we've really been talking about throughout most of this lecture. It's another mechanism of evolution. It's the final major one that I'm going to talk about here. And of all the causes of microevolution, only natural selection promotes adaptation. Students, I want you to think back and try to define what adaptation is. I'll give you a few moments to think about that. Adaptation is any trait that's actually going to be advantageous for that individual. So if a particular snake is more well camouflaged due to a genetic mutation causing the genes to make slightly different proteins that cause that snake to be a different color or pattern, if that color or pattern helps that snake hide from predators or helps that snake hide from prey better and hence survive longer and reproduce more, then that would be considered an adaptation. So it's any sort of heritable trait that is actually advantageous. Evolutionary adaptation results from chance in the random generation of genetic variability, and it also results from sorting in the unequal reproductive success among the varying individuals. I'm going to cover 3 general outcomes of natural selection, and these all have been demonstrated in natural populations, but the example that I'm going to use here is kangaroo rat fur color. With directional selection, there's going to be a shift in the phenotype curve of a population. Directional selection selects in favor of some extreme phenotype. So for example, we have the original population here showing what appears to be a nice bell curve. So the frequency of individuals is on the y-axis and increases as it goes up, and the varying phenotypes of fur color are on the x-axis. So the original population shows us that most individuals were this intermediate brown color here. There were some individuals that were very light and some individuals that were very dark, but most of the individuals that make up that population are this medium brown color. When directional selection occurs for various reasons, we have a shift in this curve to favor a more extreme phenotype. So what we have here is this curve that has shifted over, and now we have a slightly darker colored individual being the most frequent phenotype that we see in that particular population. This can lead to one species changing over time. Another type of natural selection, or a generalized outcome of how natural selection could work, is this concept known as disruptive selection. Disruptive selection favors variants at opposite extremes, and it can lead to new species evolving, otherwise known as speciation. So what we have here is this original population, again, just like the last slide, with most individuals being this medium brown color. There is some selective pressure here. Maybe it's predation, maybe it's a changing climate. This selective pressure is going to reduce the number of medium brown phenotype individuals in that population. As a result, there are going to be more individuals with very light and very dark fur color. Stabilizing selection is another sort of generic outcome of natural selection, and it culls extreme variance from a population. This results in reduced phenotypic variation. Again, we have this original population here with this normal bell curve of phenotypes. Stabilizing selection is going to work at either end of this curve to cull extremely dark colored individuals as well as extremely light colored individuals. So the resulting bell curve is going to be narrower, and there's going to be fewer variations in that population. And again, this fur color example is just an example. Stabilizing selection, directional selection, and disruptive selection can all work on different traits, not just fur color. Okay, we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about a different type of natural selection. It's still natural selection, but it's a specific type of natural selection, and it is sexual selection. Sexual selection is a form of natural selection in which individuals with certain traits are more likely than other individuals to obtain mates. And a related concept is sexual dimorphism, which is a distinction in appearance between males and females that's not directly associated with reproduction or survival. So these indirect characteristics would be known as secondary sexual characteristics. So they are not, for example, sexual organs that are directly responsible for reproductive capabilities that are different between sexes, but they're things such as antlers in male deer, for example. And getting back to that earlier example when I was talking about antler growth in males, antler size is actually an interesting example of sexual selection at work. Antlers can be thought of as a true indicator or an honest indicator of that male's condition. Because it takes so much energy to grow these structures, a male with very large antlers is obviously successful at finding food and avoiding predation. Thus, it's an honest indicator, as in it cannot be faked by behavior or any other mechanism. and it lets female deer know that this male is a strong individual with good genes, and he is a potentially very good mate. So there's going to be male-to-male combat that sometimes takes place, but more oftentimes male-to-male combat can just be reduced to rituals in which, for example, male deer size one another up and can pretty much instantly tell the opposer's condition and avoid a potentially injurious fight with that competitor. So mating rights in deer are basically determined through these ritualistic competitions, through direct fighting, as well as female choice. Of course, here we have sexual dimorphism at work. We have two birds here. They are the same species, but this solid blue one is a female, and this multicolored one is a male. In birds, most often the males are going to be more colorful. Again, these colorful feathers and other characteristics are going to be indicators of that male's ability to not only avoid predation despite the fact that he has very bright plumage, but it's an indication that he is in good condition and is healthy because he can produce those vibrant feathers. And this is an example of direct male-to-male combat in a species of ungulate here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and finish up with an evolution connection. Population genetics of the sickle cell allele. So as I mentioned before, sickle cell disease is resulting from a mutation in hemoglobin. It affects about 1 out of every 500 African American individuals, and it's more common amongst African Americans. But why is this? Well, this is because a sickle cell is actually, it can actually be an advantage in regions where mosquitoes are common and they carry malaria. So the sickle cell allele actually also confers resistance to the disease malaria, and it's adaptive in the African tropics where malaria is common. So here we have the frequencies of the sickle cell allele, with red showing high frequencies of sickle cell and white being very low frequencies. And we have this overlap. These dotted portions are the distribution of malaria caused by a protozoan, Plasmodium falciparum, which is carried by a mosquito. So due to the fact that this sickle cell disease alters the shape of red blood cells, it makes those red blood cells less susceptible to malarial infection. So this is one of the underlying, or rather the primary underlying causes of why a lot of African Americans have at least one copy of the sickle cell allele. Okay, I'm sorry that was such a long lecture. I hope you found it interesting. If you have any questions, of course, please email me. You can also post to that peer-to-peer discussion board on Blackboard, and thank you for listening, and enjoy your day.